how an obscure Silicon Valley philosopher, a scuttled tugboat, and a faked obituary gave rise to the Zizians, the most lethal subculture you've almost never heard of. Prologue: 51 stabs. Curtis Lynn can still feel the first blade sliding between his ribs. He was swinging an aluminum baseball bat at the time, trying to scare off what he thought were opportunistic burglars in the cluttered hallway of his Vallejo fourplex. Instead, the 39-year-old landlord found himself facing 3 black-clad intruders, one of whom, a slight, dew-eyed software engineer named Emma Borhanian, was already mid-lunge. By the time police arrived in the early hours of 13 November 2022, Lind had been stabbed 51 times. Miraculously, he survived. Borhanian did not. The bat crushed her skull in the chaos. The incident would later be called the Vallejo Melee, and for homicide detectives, it was the first breadcrumb on a trail that now winds through 3 states, half a dozen murders, and an internet-native ideology so esoteric it reads like fan fiction for moral philosophers. That ideology has a name, the Zizians, and a prophet, Jack Amadeus Ziz Lasota, whose very existence many first assumed was a prank. A transgender Alaskan prodigy with a resume that ping-pongs from NASA internships to vegan street theater, Lasota spent the last decade publishing rambling manifestos that fused AI apocalypse anxiety, left-wing vegan militancy, and a conviction that the left and right hemispheres of the human brain are waging civil war. In person, acquaintances say, Lasota can hold court for 12 hours straight, toggling between programming tips and one-liner jokes about meat-eaters deserving the guillotine. Online, the writing is less whimsical. It insists on total moral autonomy, a phrase repeated like scripture in now-deleted Discord channels, and concludes that violence is a rational tool when the stakes are cosmic. Police in Vallejo had never heard the term on that grim November morning. They simply cataloged evidence: a Samsung phone locked with 3 cryptic passcodes, a notebook full of differential equation doodles, 23 soy protein bars, and, stuffed in Borhanian's cargo pocket, a laminated card that read Scythe 004. Clear to remove obstructions. Over the next 30 months, investigators would come to believe that obstructions meant people, and that clearing them was the organizing principle of a cult grown in the unlikeliest petri dish, Silicon Valley's rationalist scene. 1. Before the knife, the making of Ziz Jack. Lasota was born in 1991 on Kodiak Island, Alaska, where winters are so dark, locals begin counting seconds of daylight the way other towns track baseball stats. Friends say the young Jack spent those winters hacking calculators and speed-solving Rubik's Cubes between figure skating lessons. At 15, Lasota won a state coding competition, producing an AI that predicted bear migrations. By 17, NASA's high-altitude student platform launched one of Lasota's sensor packages into the stratosphere. The resume impressed Stanford University enough to offer a place in its computer science program. Stanford's gender-inclusive dorms sealed the deal. But college life coincided with the Great Bay Area flowering of rationalism, a subculture that blends Bayesian statistics, AI safety worries, and the promise that disciplined thinking can optimize literally everything: sleep cycles, dating, even altruism. Rationalists host talky meetups where game theory puzzles are debated over vegan stroganoff. They are also, depending on whom you ask, either charmingly eccentric or insufferably pedantic. Lasota fit right in until somehow they didn't. Jack was brilliant but unmoored, recalls Ariel G., a machine learning engineer who attended those early salons. They'd steer a conversation on existential risk into a monologue about cows as a super minority deserving armed defense. Then they'd propose building pirate ships to escape capitalist property law. It was mesmerizing and exhausting. By 2016, Lasota's blog Mind had become infamous for essays that ran to 20,000 words and titles like Against Hemispheric Tyranny or Veganism, the Only Coherent Kantianism. In one post, Lasota argued that if artificial general intelligence wipes out humanity, the species most morally wronged would be factory-farmed chickens, because humans signed that death warrant by refusing to abolish meat-eating. The solution, Lasota wrote, was to create moral avatars willing to act with ruthless instrumental effectiveness. Those avatars needed training grounds, and so began the rationalist fleet. 2. All aboard the Caleb. In April 2021, Lesotho and collaborator Gwen Danielson purchased the Caleb, a 94-foot Vietnam-era tugboat rusting at anchor off Half Moon Bay, south of San Francisco. Officially, the plan was a floating hackerspace where AI safety believers could code rent-free while practicing uni-hemispheric sleep, supposedly training half the brain to rest while the other remains on watch, like dolphins. Unofficially, the Caleb was a haven for those Lesotho felt the land-based rationalists had shunned. "I stepped on deck and thought, oh God, it smells like diesel and utopia," recalls Marcos Vela, who lasted 5 weeks before quitting in disgust. He describes 8 adults sleeping in hammocks, debating whether empathy is a control system malware, and rigging cheap solar panels to power GPUs mining Monero cryptocurrency. The boat dragged anchor twice, nearly colliding with a NOAA buoy. After the second incident, the Coast Guard declared it derelict. In 2022, county crews scuttled the vessel. Danielson, who at the time was dating Lesotho, called the scuttling eco-terrorism, noting the Caleb was home to the only people actually trying to prevent AI genocide. But even sympathizers concede life aboard was chaotic. One member got hypothermia attempting a midnight swim, a cold exposure ritual. Another sliced a tendon practicing Filipino knife drills on the aft deck. Yet the fleet cemented a sense of embattled community. When they lost the boat, the group pivoted to vans, squats, and eventually, a rented warehouse in Vallejo, where the walls filled with whiteboards mapping paths to moral victory. And it is here, sources say, that the language of scythes and masks appears. Roles in an operation matrix critics now call a kill list. Number 3. The Redwood Standoff. If the Caleb was a crucible, the Redwood Standoff was the break. On 12th of October 2019, the Center for Applied Rationality, CFAR, hosted a children's weekend at a retreat near Guerneville, California. 4 figures in Guy Fawkes masks arrived uninvited, chained the camp's gate, and demanded same-gender frisking by female officers only. Staff dialed 911. A bewildered SWAT team evacuated kids while negotiators tried to parse the protesters' manifesto, which accused CFAR of selling AI apocalypse insurance and failing to adopt vegan catering. The protest ended without bloodshed, but did yield an arrest. Jay Lesotho, age 28, resisting. Wired journalist Evan Ratliff later spent 9 months reconstructing the event from body cam footage, Discord leaks, and 37 interviews. His piece, published 21st February 2025, argues the standoff was the moment Lesotho accepted outsider status. From that day, Ratliff writes, Jack drops the plural "we rationalists" and begins using "we pirates." The shift mattered. Within a year, the private Discord servers splintered. Those who stayed with Lesotho embraced a more militant lexicon, talk of scythes, attackers, masks, logistics, and procurers, finance. They also adopted a shared salutation. Clear to remove obstructions. Obituaries of the living fast forward to August 2022. At 2:17 a.m., the Coast Guard logs a radio call. Man overboard, possible fatality. Coordinates off Oakland Airport. A brief search turns up nothing. 10 days later, the Kodiak Daily Mirror prints an obituary for Jack Amadeus Lesotho, 31, beloved adventurer, lover of blueberries. The piece claims Jack slipped during a midnight meditation and drowned. There is no body, no death certificate, just the obituary, an urn shipped COD to a non-existent address, and a Facebook post from Gwen Danielson reading, "The ocean ate a brilliant mind tonight." Police would later call the obituary an intentional misdirection. By December, Lesotho was very much alive, holed up in a Pennsylvania motel 2 rooms away from Michelle Zadko, the daughter of future homicide victims. When state troopers raided, Lesotho was found lying face down, whispering, "I am observing my breath." The fake death bought time. It also marks the moment the Zizians, now itinerant, went dark, switching to encrypted chat, storing phones in Faraday bags, leaving no forwarding addresses. When they resurfaced, they did so violently. 5. Season of Knives, The Killings of 2022-2025, Vallejo, 13th November 2022. The first stabbing leaves landlord Curtis Lynn clinging to life. The coroner later counts 23 wounds before Borhanian's fatal skull fracture, delivered by Lynn's frantic swing. Dow and Leatham flee but are arrested an hour later buying bandages and oat milk at a 7-Eleven. Police search Borhanian's car and find a trunk packed with survival food, latex gloves, a tactical tomahawk, and a Sharpie-scrawled checklist titled Operation Seafoam. Chester Heights, 31st December 2022. Richard and Rita Zajko throw a New Year's Eve brunch for neighbors. At 3:07 p.m., shots ring out. Neighbors see a dark sedan speed off. Officers later find 41-year-old Michelle Zajko at a motel 15 miles away, nearly catatonic, according to the arrest report. She's released without charges, but remains a person of interest. Lesota is discovered, silent, in the adjacent room. No one can explain why the pair were there or why the room is littered with vegan jerky wrappers and chem-light sticks. Vallejo again, 17th January 2025. Lind, the surviving landlord, posts on Facebook, "Life is good. Police said trial soon. I'm keeping the faith." 4 hours later, he is dead, stabbed on his own porch. Across the bay, a Discord user named ScytheMax responds with a skull emoji and writes, "Flossed. Witness silenced." Authorities believe ScytheMax is Maximilian Snyder, a British pianist turned software tester who entered the US on an ESTA waiver and never left. Coventry, Vermont, 20 January 2025. Border Patrol agent David Malland approaches a snow-dusted barn following an anonymous tip about a crypto farm. Inside stands Felix Ophelia Baucolt, aiming a .45. Malland fires, Baucolt fires back. Both die. Teresa Youngblood emerges with a shoulder wound and is arrested. A search uncovers a box truck outfitted with solar panels and lined with foil. Inside, inspectors find 5 rifles, an EM-hardened laptop, and handwritten plans referencing High Providence event. Frostburg, Maryland, 16th of February 2025. State troopers stop a speeding van on I-68. Driver, Lesota. Passengers, Michelle Zajko, Daniel Blank. Cargo, 3 AR-15 variants, 2 Glocks, thousands of rounds, a sheaf of printed maps marked with X's. Troopers arrest all 3, calling Lesota an extremist leader preparing for imminent action. By now, the press is in a feeding frenzy. Reporters coin the Zizians, riffing on Jack's online handle, and pundits squabble over whether the murders constitute lone wolf violence or an emergent terror cell. One headline crystallizes the new narrative: Silicon Valley's deadly vegan cult. 6. The digital Rosetta Stone. Exactly how authorities untangled the private Discord is classified, but sources close to the investigation describe a Trojan horse. An FBI sting on a privacy coin mixer yields a list of withdrawal addresses, 2 of which lead to a barely maintained domain hosting a JavaScript pastebin. From there, agents scrape chat backups and eventually 32 gigabytes of logs. Among the revelations, a spreadsheet titled Panopticon with 87 rows assigning members as scythes, assassins, masks, logistics, or procurers, finance. Each row tracks weapons proficiency, crypto balance, and moral autonomy completion. Chat snippets where a user called Zizigarat writes, "To hesitate is to enslave. Remove obstruction or be obstruction." References to uni-hemispheric readiness drills performed by forcing day-long wakefulness followed by micronaps in a darkened van. A purchase log listing $14,300 Monero spent on a CNC millhead, presumably to machine lower receivers for ghost guns. Perhaps most chilling, a pledge many members sign off with, "I, brain pilgrims, swear loyalty to hemispheric independence, accept exile from flesh tyranny, and will enforce autonomy wherever obstruction resides." Prosecutors now frame this as overt evidence of conspiracy. Defense attorneys insist it is edgy roleplay. The jury will decide which. 7. Portraits in obsession. Jack Ziz Lesota, now 34, Lesota sits in Allegheny County Detention Center, Western Maryland. Cell Block C guards say Jack spends hours writing in tiny print on legal pads, occasionally pausing to do handstand push-ups. A psychiatrist who evaluated Lesota called the intellect formidable, the personality rigid, with grandiose moral schema. Emma Borhanian, a prodigy who corrected Python code for Google at 12 and dissected Nietzsche at 15. Borhanian was the first to die. Her parents blame the cult's grueling sleep phase inversion for breaking their daughter's grip on reality. Maximilian Snyder. Raised in a Victorian townhouse off London's Regent's Park, Snyder was a scholarship pianist at Oxford before veering into effective altruism forums. Immigration officers note he arrived in the US with a suitcase of sheet music, 2 laptops, and a copy of Anna Karenina, annotated in the margins with "Monism must kill the family." Teresa Youngblood and Felix Baucolt, childhood best friends turned lovers turned co-defendants. Friends recall them wrapping phones in aluminum foil at cafes and insisting the NSA had seeded COVID via 5G towers. Baucholt's death in Vermont remains the only fatality on the Zizian side so far. Narrate lawfare. The coming RICO battle, 5 clocks now tick in courthouses from Vermont to California. Lasota and Michelle Zyko in Maryland on the 20th of June, Youngblood's detention review on the 28th of May, Snyder's murder prelim on the 9th of July, and Dow plus Leatham's attempted murder trial starting 2nd of September. But federal prosecutors hint these may be warm-ups. A senior DOJ official, speaking on background, says a draft RICO indictment alleges that Lasota directed an ongoing enterprise committed to violent enforcement of ideological purity. If filed, it would stitch the stabbings, shootings, and interstate travel, funded by Monero donations from vegan extremist sympathizers, into one sweeping conspiracy charge. RICO is rarely applied outside organized crime, but legal scholars note precedent. In 2001, the Earth Liberation Front dodged RICO only because its cells lacked proven hierarchy. The Zizians, with their spreadsheets and laminated scythe cards, may meet the threshold. Defense lawyers counter that Discord bravado is not command authority and that half the chats are LARPing, live-action roleplay, by introverts starved for meaning. Whatever the outcome, the trials will force American juries to parse online ideology as actionable blueprint versus adolescent fantasy. One prosecutor quips, "We're about to find out whether shitposting can constitute predicate acts." 9. Collateral damage. While legal teams spar, the victims' families navigate a quieter hell. Curtis Lynn's sister, Samantha, runs a GoFundMe for her brother's 2 children, writing, "He rented to them because they said they were artists. Now he's gone, and the world calls it philosophy." Richard and Rita Zyko's house sits unsold. Their backyard koi pond, where Richard loved feeding fish at dusk, is overgrown. Michelle's high school yearbooks have become macabre artifacts. A former teacher shows reporters Michelle's senior quote, "Nothing kills like kindness and a well-aimed logic bomb." Then there is Agent David Mallon's widow, Lee, juggling 2 toddlers and VA paperwork. Asked about the Vermont shootout, she says only, "My husband died checking a barn. Why was there an armory in a barn?" 10. How a blog becomes a body count ritual. Narrative and community are old alchemy, but the internet accelerates the chemical reaction. The Zizians turned fringe essays into marching orders thanks to 3 modern force multipliers. Encryption at scale. Free end-to-end platforms let would-be militants share kill lists with the confidence of spy agencies. Cryptocurrency. The group's Monero wallet received hundreds of micropayments labeled "for the animals" or "free the slaves," a trickle that became an ocean, enough to buy guns, CNC equipment, and gas money across the continent. Identity markets. In every Discord tranche, members swap roles, genders, even birthdays as if drafting avatars for a multiplayer game. The fluidity can liberate and radicalize. One junior member wrote, "I was non-binary until I became non-human. Now I am Scythe." Sociologist Dr. Amita Kozla calls the Zizians the first terror cell to treat personhood like open-source software. She argues the group's allure is not the violence, but the promise of radical reinvention. When Ziz says, "Be your own hemisphere," that's seductive. It offers absolution from the messy, negotiated self the rest of us inhabit. 11. The road to 2026. Assuming no plea deals, trials will roll into mid-2026. Each will test a different facet. Maryland will probe weapons logistics, Vermont the federal scope of ideology, California the raw brutality of murder, Pennsylvania the shadow of parricide. Jurors in small-town courthouses will sift through philosophy essays, crypto ledgers, and videos of brainwave experiments performed on sleep-deprived 20-somethings. Prosecutors will argue a straight line runs from mind-knife blog posts to blood on a landlord's porch. Defense teams will plead performance art, mental illness, online roleplay, anything but conspiracy. Outside court, copycats lurk. FBI bulletins already warn of emerging vegan expiation cells. Quoting Lasota sermons. Rationalist forums debate whether banning extremist speech is itself a slippery slope to epistemic dictatorship. Tech CEOs, once enamored with effective altruism, now vet hires for cult leakage. And somewhere in a Maryland jail cell, Jack Amadeus Lasota keeps writing. One guard swears the latest legal pad contains nothing but a single phrase, repeated down the page like an incantation. Clear to remove obstructions. Clear to remove obstructions. Clear to remove obstructions. Epilogue. The knife in the mind. On a gray April afternoon this year, I stood on a bluff at Pillar Point Harbor, looking out at the chop where the Caleb once bobbed. A rust-red section of its hull still breaks the surface at low tide, barnacled and listing, a monument to impossible dreams. I tried to picture the floating commune alive, laptops humming under a tarp, young idealists debating how to save cows from the apocalypse. It is tempting to end the story here in irony, with a busted tugboat and delusions sunk beneath California waves. But that ignores the blood in Vallejo gutters, the bullet scar in a Vermont barn door, the koi pond gone silent in Pennsylvania. The Zizians are a cautionary tale for the age of frictionless extremism. Proof that when ideology becomes cosplay, cosplay can become conspiracy, and conspiracy can, with terrifying speed, become murder. The bridge from keyboard to crime scene was once long and rickety. Encryption, cryptocurrency, and pandemic-driven isolation shortened and paved it. All it needed was a charismatic prophet whispering total moral autonomy to travelers already yearning for absolution. Philosophers say ideas are dangerous only when they find a host. The internet provides billions, and somewhere in the half-lit corners of a Discord server, another host is surely waiting, ready to pick up the dropped narrative threads, eager to wield a new mind knife. The real question is not whether we can stop the next Zizian manifesto from being written. It is whether we can keep it, this time, from being read and believed.